In this lesson, we're going to continue using provide inject technique to provide access to some data or functions to descending components from parent components. And specifically in this lesson, we're going to provide access to timelineItems array to ActivitySecondsToComplete component, since this component needs to read this array in order to calculate remaining time. And for now, we're passing this array to ActivitySecondsToComplete component as a prop. But the problem is that timelineItems array is declared within the root component. So all the parent components that come before ActivitySecondsToComplete component, they also need to get access to timelineItems array in order to send this array as props down to ActivitySecondsToComplete component. As we can see in here, ActivityItem component also accepts this array as a prop. The same goes with the activities parent component. And finally, this timelineItems array is passed as a prop from the root component. And now, just to avoid passing this prop through a lot of different components, to pass it to the descending component which is actually going to use this array, we can use the technique provide inject to provide access to timelineItems array from the root component to any descending component, which can get access to this array by simply calling inject function like here. So right now we're going to provide access to timelineItems array declared within the app component. First of all, let's move the provide function call to the end of this script. And then let's duplicate this line, and this time we're gonna provide access to timelineItems array. So let's call this key simply timelineItems. And just because timelineItems array is a reactive array, the underlying value we need to read by using value property like this. And after doing this, we no longer need to explicitly pass timelineItems array to the activities component via prop. Let's remove this line. And of course, since we have removed this prop, we no longer need to declare this prop within define props macro. Let's remove this declaration from the activities component. So this way validation function validate timelineItems, as we can see, is no longer used. So let's remove this import. The same thing goes with ActivityItem component. We no longer need to pass timelineItems array as a prop. So we need to do the same within ActivityItem component. Let's switch over to this component. Firstly, we're going to remove property declaration timelineItems, as well as import of validation function validate timelineItems. And finally, we're no longer passing timelineItems array as a property to ActivitySeconds component, because we can simply gain access to timelineItems array within ActivitySecondsToComplete component by using the inject function. We're gonna do it right now. Firstly, let's remove timelineItems declaration from define props macro, as well as validate timelineItems function. So instead, just to gain access to timelineItems array, we're gonna use inject, which we need to import from Vue package. Right here, let's create new constant timelineItems, and by using function call inject with the appropriate key, which we have used to register timelineItems array from the root component, this key is called timelineItems. We get a reference to timelineItems array within timelineItems constant. And now whenever this timelineItems array is used inside of this component, we don't need to reference this array by using props object. But since this array is available as a simple timelineItems constant, we're gonna reference timelineItems array as a normal constant, like this. And after this, after selecting ActivitySecondsToComplete component within Vue DevTools, on the right side we can see section provided, which now includes one more entry, timelineItems array. Which means we can easily directly access this timelineItems array without having to pass this array as properties from the root component, because the root component now provides access to this array to every descending component. And now we can do all the things we were able to do before, such as setting the time goal for this particular activity, and then start tracking the time. Let's make sure that this time decreases every second on activities page. And now let's also try to reset the stopwatch time and make sure that the time on the activities page was reset back to its original value. And this is exactly what we're seeing in here. So we have successfully provided access to timelineItems array from the root component to all its descendants. We're going to continue development in the next lesson, and the link to the repository of this project will be in the video description.